They say loyalty is a currency, but in the Jinwoo house, it's a death sentence. Cade held the glass to the light, unaware that the liquid inside wasn't just whiskey. It was a tombstone, and the woman standing before him, she wasn't just a waitress. She was the only thing standing between him and a shallow grave. The room was cold. Despite the 100 bodies packed into the Jinwoo gala, money has a way of chilling the air, turning every smile into a calculated risk. Cade Jinwoo sat at the center of it all, the silent sun. People didn't just look at him. They watched for the slightest twitch of his hand, the smallest narrowing of his eyes. To them, he was a god. To his enemies, he was a wall that needed to crumble. Sela Akoy moved through the crowd like a ghost. She was used to being invisible. It was her superpower. As a waitress for the city's most elite firms, she had learned that the powerful never look at the help, and that's why they never see the knife coming. But tonight, Sela wasn't just watching. She was trembling. She had heard the whisper in the corridor. The frantic, jagged voice of Cade's own brother, Haru, bargaining away a life for a seat at the head of the table. Before we begin, take a second to like, comment, and subscribe, because what you're about to witness is a masterclass in betrayal, and the price one woman is willing to pay for the truth. The weight of the silver tray felt like a leaden anchor in Sela's hand. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of professional indifference. That was the rule. Don't be a person, be a service. She stood at the edge of the VIP lounge, the air thick with the smell of mahogany and expensive cigars. Cade was there, seated in a high-backed leather chair, surrounded by men who looked like they were carved from granite. He was mid-sentence, his voice a low, melodic rumble that commanded the very oxygen in the room. He didn't look like a man about to die. He looked like a man who owned the concept of time. Then she saw him, Haru, the younger brother, the golden son. He was standing by the bar, his knuckles white as he gripped his own drink. He caught Sela's eye for a fraction of a second, and in that moment she saw it. The frantic, sweating panic of a man who had just committed a murder before the body was even cold. He looked at the whiskey glass sitting on the side table next to Cade, the glass Haru had personally prepared. Sela's mind raced. If she spoke, the guards would tackle her before the first syllable left her lips. If she screamed, she'd be labeled a lunatic. But if she did nothing... Cade's hand reached out. Long, elegant fingers wrapped around the crystal. He began to lift it. Move. Sela didn't think. She lunged forward, her hip catching the edge of the side table with a deliberate, clumsy force. The accident was a masterpiece of staged chaos. As the table tilted, she swung her tray in a wide, sweeping arc. In the blur of movement, the clatter of silverware and the gasp of the socialites, her hand shot out. With the precision of a card sharp, she snatched the tainted glass from the table and replaced it with a fresh one from her tray. The swap took less than half a second. The room went silent. The heavy thud of the tainted glass hitting her tray sounded like a gunshot in her ears. Cade's hand was still in the air, frozen. He looked down at the new glass. Then slowly, agonizingly slowly, he turned his gaze upward. His eyes weren't angry. They were terrifyingly calm. They were the eyes of a predator who had just felt the wind change direction. "You're clumsy," Cade said. The words were soft, but they cut through the room like a blade. Sela dropped to her knees, her head bowed, her breath coming in ragged stabs. I am so sorry, Mr. Jinwoo. The floor. It was slick. Please, let me replace that for you." She could feel his stare. It was a physical weight on the back of her neck. He didn't take the drink. He didn't move. He just watched the way her hands shook, and the way she gripped the tray as if it were the only thing keeping her on this earth. Cade Jinwoo didn't believe in accidents. In his world, an accident was just a plan that hadn't been polished enough. He looked at the woman kneeling before him. She was wearing the uniform of the catering staff, a plain black dress, a name tag that read Sela, but her eyes, they didn't match the uniform. There was a fire there, a desperate, flickering intelligence that he hadn't seen in the eyes of his associates in years. "Stand up," Cade commanded. Sela rose, her legs feeling like water. She kept her eyes on his silk tie, refusing to meet his gaze. On the tray, the tainted whiskey sat innocently, shimmering under the chandelier light. "Look at me, Sela," he whispered. She lifted her chin. The tension in the room was suffocating. Haru had stepped forward now, his face a pale mask of horror. "Cade, she's just a clumsy girl. Don't waste your breath. Guards, get her out of here." The guards moved, but Cade raised a single finger. They stopped instantly. "Haru, why are you so eager to dismiss her?" Cade asked, his voice deceptively light. He finally reached out and took the new glass Sela had placed on the table. He swirled the amber liquid, watching the light dance through it. "She saved my suit from a very expensive stain, or perhaps she saved more than that." Sela felt the air leave her lungs. "Does he know?" Cade stood up. He was taller than he looked when seated, a towering presence of dark wool and hidden steel. He stepped closer to Sela, leaning in until she could smell the faint scent of sandalwood and cold iron. "You swapped them," he murmured, so low only she could hear. "Why?" "I don't know what you mean, sir," she lied. Her voice was a thread ready to snap. Cade smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a man who had just found a new puzzle to solve. He turned back to the room, raising the clean glass. "To family," he announced, his eyes locked onto Haru's trembling form. "And to the unexpected people who keep us safe." He drained the glass. Haru looked like he was going to vomit. As the crowd began to murmur and return to their drinks, Cade leaned back into Sela's space. "Don't leave the building. My driver will be waiting at the service exit. If you aren't in the car in 10 minutes, I'll assume you were the one who put the poison in the first glass." He walked away without waiting for an answer, leaving Sela standing in the middle of the lion's den, holding a tray that contained enough evidence to start a war. 10 minutes. Sela ran. She didn't go to the locker room. She didn't grab her coat. She burst through the kitchen, ignoring the shouts of the head chef, and dove into the cold night air of the service alley. Her mind was screaming at her to keep running, to disappear into the city, to grab her brother Zaire and flee. But where would they go? Cade Jinwoo's influence reached into the very marrow of the city. If she ran, she was guilty. If she stayed, she was a witness. A black sedan sat idling at the end of the alley. The windows were tinted to a deep, bruised purple. The door opened automatically. Sela climbed in. The interior was silent, smelling of leather and power. Cade was already there, sitting in the shadows of the back seat. He didn't look at her as she sat down. He was looking at a tablet, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of a security feed. "Zaire Akoy," Cade said. 7 years old, severe respiratory condition, requires a specialized nebulizer and monthly treatments that cost more than you make in a year. Sela's heart stopped. "How do you? Leave him out of this, please." "I don't leave anything out, Sela. I am a man of details." He finally turned to her. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, sealed vial. Inside was a sample of the liquid from the glass she had swapped. "My chemist just finished the rapid scan. Neurotoxin, highly concentrated. It would have looked like a stroke. Clean, professional." He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. "You didn't put it there. If you had, you wouldn't have swapped it. You would have watched me die and collected your paycheck. So, that leaves me with a very uncomfortable question." He paused, the silence stretching until Sela felt like she was going to scream. "Who told you?" Cade asked. Sela shook her head. I just heard. I was in the hall." "Names, Sela. I need names." "It was Haru," she whispered. The words felt like treason. Cade didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the car's engine. Then, Cade reached out and touched her name tag. "My brother is a fool," Cade said softly. "He thinks he can buy loyalty with fear, but you gave it for free, or perhaps, for a reason I haven't figured out yet." He pulled a thick envelope from the seat pocket and dropped it in her lap. "This is for Zaire's treatment, for the next 6 months." Sela looked at the money, then back at him. "Why? You don't even know if I'm telling the truth." "I know," Cade said, his voice turning cold as ice. "Because Haru is currently in the library trying to scrub the security footage from the hallway. What he doesn't know is that I own the servers, and I've been watching him fail for years." He leaned back, closing his eyes. You're not a waitress anymore, Sela. You're a liability. And in my house, we either eliminate liabilities or we turn them into assets. The car began to move, gliding into the dark heart of the city. Which one are you going to be? The car ride ended not at a warehouse or a dock, but at a modest, well-lit apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. Cade's efficiency was terrifying. He didn't ask where she lived, he simply delivered her there. As the car pulled to the curb, Cade didn't look at her. His eyes were back on the tablet, the cold blue light reflecting in his pupils. Tomorrow morning, 8:00 a.m., a car will pick you up. You have a new job, Sela, one that requires discretion, and that same sharp hearing you used tonight. Sela clutched the envelope of money, the cost of Zawyer's breath, and stepped out. The door closed behind her, sealing in the scent of sandalwood and danger. Her apartment was warm, a stark contrast to the limousine. Zawyer was asleep on the sofa, the rhythmic metallic hiss of his nebulizer the only sound. He looked so small in the fatting glow of the television, a brilliant mind trapped in a fragile body. Sela knelt beside him, brushing a coil of dark hair from his forehead. Every sacrifice was for this breath. Tonight, she had sold her soul to the Jinwoo family, but she had bought her brother time. The next morning, the black car arrived precisely at 8:00 a.m. This time, Cade wasn't inside. The driver, a silent, broad-shouldered man named T, drove her to the outskirts of the city, to a place that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The Jinwoo estate. She was ushered not into the grand halls of the previous night, but into a sterile, high-tech wing she hadn't known existed. Cade was there, waiting in a room lined with monitors. He was no longer the elite socialite. Today, he was the warlord of information. "Welcome to the Asset Management Division," Cade said. He gestured to the screens. They were watching Haru. Haru looked frantic. He was packing his luxurious apartment, the very portrait of a man waiting for a blow that he knew was coming. Cade had made sure the news of his near miss with the tainted whiskey spread through the family network, but he hadn't named a suspect. He was letting the silence hunt Haru first. "Your job," Cade said, his voice flat, "is to listen. Haru uses a specific encrypted messaging app. We've cracked it. I need you to translate his conversations, not the words, the tone. He's going to make a mistake. He's going to reach out to the person who gave him the toxin. I need to know who that is." Sela looked at the screens. She was being asked to act as a judge in a sibling war she didn't fully understand. "He's your brother, Cade." "And he tried to murder me in a room full of witnesses," Cade snapped, his composure slipping for the briefest moment. "In my world, Sela, brother is just a word for the man who knows where your back is turned." Sela sat down at the console. The first messages began to flash across the screen, heavily coded, jagged bursts of panicked Korean. She translated. "The girl, who is she? Where did she go? We need to find her before he does." Cade watched over her shoulder. "He's still looking for you. He thinks you know the whole plan. Use that." Sela's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was the bait. The game was a mental chokehold. For 3 days, Sela sat in the control room, analyzing Haru's communications while the world went on outside. Zawyer's treatments were paid for, his breathing was better, but Sela felt like she was suffocating. She was communicating with Haru, posing as the person who had supplied the toxin. Cade was guiding her, telling her exactly which buttons to push, which fears to stoke. "You failed," Sela typed under Cade's instruction. "He knows it's only a matter of time." She could see Haru's reaction on the screen, the frantic packing, the way he kept checking the locks on his door. Cade was creating a ghost to haunt his brother, and Sela was that ghost's voice. But a question was growing in Sela's mind, a jagged stone that refused to be swallowed. Why was Cade using her? He had a dozen experts who could have done this faster. Why the waitress? The answer came late on the 3rd night. Cade had left the control room, and Sela was alone with the monitors. A single message popped onto Haru's screen. A response that wasn't coded. It was from a contact named S. "He always was the favorite, Haru. He got the empire. You get the blame. Do what you have to do." Sela froze. It wasn't the content of the message that stopped her heart. It was the tone. It was soothing, seductive, manipulative. It reminded her of something, or rather someone. She heard the door to the control room open. Cade stood there, a shadow against the hallway light. He walked silently to her console and looked at the message. "He didn't act alone," Cade said softly. "You knew that." "But this isn't a rival, is it? This is someone close. Someone who knows exactly how to manipulate him," Sela said, her voice trembling. Cade didn't answer directly. He pulled up another screen, one showing a woman. The same woman who had been watching from the blurred background of the thumbnail, the presence that had signaled betrayal. This was Cade's stepmother, Haru's mother, the matriarch. "She doesn't want me dead," Cade said, his eyes hard. "She wants me humiliated. She wants me to be seen as weak, incapable. She wants me to dismantle the company with my own paranoia before handing it to Haru." He looked down at Sela, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability beneath the steel mask. "She uses people's needs against them, Sela. She knows I want the family legacy more than anything. She knows Haru wants acceptance." "And what does she know about me?" Sela whispered. "That you need me to save your brother," Cade said. "She's the one who ensured the hospital bills were never fully processed, Sela. She's the one who made you invisible." The truth hit like a physical blow. The humiliation, the struggle, the fear for Zawyer's breath. It had all been a play directed by this woman to create the perfect leverage against Cade. Sela hadn't been an accident. She had been the weapon, and Haru's bad planning had forced her to fire it prematurely. Sela stood at a crossroads that had no safe exit. She could keep the truth to herself, continue acting as Cade's tool, and receive the money. Or she could expose the full extent of the manipulation, possibly shattering the Jinwoo legacy and everything Cade had worked to build. Cade was watching her, waiting for her to choose her side. "Haru has arranged a meeting, tonight, with the person he thinks gave him the toxin. You're going to be that person." "He will know I'm not his supplier, Cade." He saw my face. He saw a terrified Waitress. "Tonight, he's going to see the woman who controls his fate. You'll wear a mask. You'll say the words I tell you. He'll make a final confession, and we'll have the proof we need to force his mother to stand down." The social stakes were now visible, raw and bleeding. The reputation, the legacy, it was all hanging by a thread, and Cade was preparing to pull it. He was choosing to risk a public scandal to protect the only family he had left, even if it meant destroying him. Sela thought of Zawyer. What if this woman, the matriarch, found out that she was working for Cade? What if she cut off the treatments permanently? "I can't do this, Cade," Sela said, her voice a fragile thing. "It's too much. Zawyer, if something happens to him." Cade moved closer, his presence a powerful, consuming thing. He took her hands, his fingers unexpectedly warm. "Nothing is going to happen to Zawyer. I have already had him moved to a private clinic, a clinic I own. The treatments will continue, whether you do this tonight or not." Sela looked up at him, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. "Then why me? If you can do all this, why do you need me at that meeting?" Cade's jaw tightened. For a long, silent moment, he just looked at her. He looked at the quiet dignity she held even while crying, the strength that had allowed her to swap the glass when others would have frozen. "Because, Sela, I need someone to tell me where my back is turned," he whispered, repeating his own bitter definition of a brother. "You acted to save a life when you had nothing to gain. Haru acted to destroy one when he had everything. I need to know what real integrity looks like, because I have forgotten." The humiliation of her past, the fact that her struggle had been a manufactured social experiment, was being stripped away, replaced by something far more dangerous. Earned respect from a man who had never respected anyone. "Tell me what I have to do," Sela said, her voice now steel. She wasn't an asset anymore. She was an ally. The location was a derelict shipping warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, a place where the city's glitter couldn't reach. The air was thick with the smell of rust and salt. Sela stood in the center of a single pool of overhead light, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wore a long, charcoal gray coat provided by Cade, the collar turned up, and a delicate silk scarf obscuring the lower half of her face. In her ear, a tiny receiver crackled. Cade's voice was a low, steady anchor in the darkness. "He's entering through the north door. Stay calm. You are the one in control. Remember, he is more afraid of you than you are of him." Haru stepped into the light. He looked like a ghost of the man from the gala. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes darted around the shadows with a frantic, animalistic energy. He stopped 5 feet away from her, his breath hitching. "I brought the rest of the payment," Haru said, his voice cracking. He held up a heavy leather briefcase. "But I want the footage. You said you had the backup from the kitchen corridor. Give it to me and we're done. I never want to see your face again." Sela didn't move. She kept her posture upright, her gaze steady. "The footage is safe," she said, her voice muffled but firm as Cade had coached her. "But the price has changed, Haru. I don't want money anymore. I want to know why. Why would you kill your own blood? Cade gave you everything." Haru let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. "Gave me everything. He gave me a cage. He's the favorite, the brilliant one, the one my mother looks at with pride while I'm just the backup plan. She told me it was the only way. She said Cade was becoming a liability to the family reputation, that he was too soft on the low-class elements of the city." "And the toxin," Sela pressed, her voice trembling slightly. "Where did it really come from?" "It doesn't matter," Haru shouted, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "My mother arranged it. She said if Cade died, I'd be the hero who stepped in to save the legacy. She promised me the seat. Just give me the footage." "The seat is already taken, Haru." The voice didn't come from Sela. It came from the darkness behind her. Cade stepped into the light, his expression a mask of cold, agonizing betrayal. He wasn't looking at the briefcase or the warehouse. He was looking at his brother, the boy he had protected for 30 years. Haru's face went white. The briefcase slipped from his numb fingers and hit the concrete with a dull thud. "Cade!" It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," Cade said softly. "You didn't just try to kill me. You tried to kill our father's memory. And you did it for a woman who would discard you the moment you became inconvenient." The silence that followed was heavier than the darkness. Haru fell to his knees, his sobs the only sound in the cavernous space. Behind Cade, several figures moved in the shadows, the elite security team, and more importantly, the family's legal counsel. Every word of the confession had been recorded, not just for Cade, but for the board of directors. Cade turned to Sela. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was something much deeper, a recognition of the weight she had carried for him. He stepped toward her and gently reached out, unwrapping the silk scarf from her face. "You're done, Sela," he whispered. "Go home to Zaire." But as Sela turned to leave, the warehouse doors burst open. It wasn't the police. It was the matriarch. Cade's stepmother entered with the calculated grace of a queen visiting a battlefield. She didn't look at her sobbing son. She didn't look at the guards. She looked directly at Cade, and then, with a sneer of pure disgust, at Sela. "So this is the girl," the matriarch said, her voice like ice water. "The little waitress who thinks she can play at the adults' table. Cade, you've always had a weakness for the dignified underdog. It's a flaw. It's why you're unfit to lead." "The flaw," Cade countered, stepping in front of Sela, "was thinking that I valued the chair more than the people who sit in it. Haru has confessed. You are being stripped of your voting rights on the board effective immediately. The morality clause you tried to use against me, it works both ways." The matriarch's eyes flashed with a momentary panic before she regained her composure. She looked at Sela, a cruel smile touching her lips. "And what about her? You think she's your savior? She's a mercenary, Cade. She took your money for her brother's lungs. She would have taken mine if I'd offered more." Sela stepped forward, out from behind Cade's shadow. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a woman who had seen the bottom of the world and decided to climb back up. "I didn't take his money to betray you," Sela said, her voice ringing clear. "I took it because he was the only one in this room who saw me as a human being. You saw me as a tool. Haru saw me as a witness. But Cade, he saw a partner. That's why you lost. You don't understand how power works when it's built on respect instead of fear." The matriarch stood silent, the first cracks appearing in her polished facade. For the first time in her life, she had been truly seen by someone she considered invisible. 1 month later, the Jinwoo estate was quiet. The scandal had been handled with Cade's trademark discretion. Haru had been sent to a private rehabilitation facility abroad, and the matriarch had retired to the family's coastal estate, stripped of her power and her influence. Cade sat in the library, the same room where the betrayal had begun. But the air was different now. It didn't feel cold. A knock at the door signaled Sela's arrival. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a sharp, tailored suit of her own, her braids pulled back in an elegant crown. She wasn't a waitress, and she wasn't a spy. She was the new director of the Jinwoo Foundation, a branch of the company Cade had pivoted to focus on medical equity and community transparency. "Zawyer's surgery was a success," Sela said, sitting across from him. There was no desk between them this time, just two equals. "He's breathing on his own. He keeps asking when his uncle Cade is going to teach him how to read a stock ticker." Cade chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "Tell him as soon as he can beat me at chess." He looked at her, his expression softening. The guarded, suspicious man from the thumbnail was gone, replaced by someone who had finally found a reason to trust. "You saved my life twice, Sela. Once with a glass of whiskey, and once by showing me that my legacy didn't have to be a prison." "We saved each other," she corrected him. The social divide was still there. The world would always see a wealthy Korean elite and a black woman from the working class. But inside the walls of their partnership, those labels were meaningless. They had earned their respect in the trenches of betrayal. As the sun rose over the city, Cade stood and offered her his hand. Not as a boss, but as a partner. "Shall we go?" he asked. "There's a lot of work to do." Sela took his hand, her grip firm and sure. "Let's go." Every choice has a price, but some are worth paying. Cade lost a brother but found his soul, and Sela stopped being a ghost in her own life. So, tell me, who do you think made the more difficult choice? The man who had to tear down his family to save his integrity, or the woman who risked her brother's safety to do what was right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories where the underdog finally takes the throne, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next.